Hello everyone, welcome back to EEE 641 Advanced Electromagnetic Field Theory. In today's lecture, lecture number 24, we are going to continue our discussion on scattering from the canonical structure. This is our last lecture on scattering, and from the next lecture, we are going to start discussing the chapter 15, that is a Green's function. So in today's lecture, primarily we can divide today's lecture into three parts. First part is going to be a brief review of what we have been discussing lately. That is nothing but scattering from the wages. So we will go through the scattering from the wages, expressions for the wages. We have derived those expression in the previous lecture. So we will see we will go through those expressions and also look at the results predicted by such expressions, and we'll see we will try to investigate those expressions. uh, After that, the second topic is basically we are going to discuss diffraction, and we can broadly divide diffraction into two parts. One is a diffraction from the edges, and the second one is diffraction from the curved surface. So again, we'll go through both the diffraction, what are the typical expressions for this diffraction, and we'll also go through, again we'll go through some results for different various geometries. In the end, for the third part, what we will do is we'll derive the expression for the scattering from the sphere or a spherical structure. Now we know that a spherical structure is one of the most important canonical structure which we want to have, which we want to study. The reason is the spherical structures are they have symmetry along theta and phi directions. As a result of that, regardless of the direction from which we look at that spherical structure or a sphere, uh, we will always measure the same RCS. It will give us, or it will present the same RCS regardless of the direction. And that is why it is a very standard, you can say that is a standard structure which you can use for the calibration purpose while you are doing measurements of the scattering. Uh, Now, what we do is, so basically what happens, regardless of its orientation, whether it has been rotated or uh, if you change the location of your observer, it will always present the same RCS, and that's the beauty about this structure. And as a result of that, we can use that as a standard structure, and fortunately, we can also derive the analytical expression for the scattering from spherical structure, and we'll do that in this lecture. So what we will do is we'll investigate scattering from two type of spheres. First is going to be perfectly conducting, that is PEC sphere, and also in the end we will also discuss the scattering from the dielectric sphere. So as I mentioned, basically we will discuss three topics in today's lecture. First, we'll again briefly review the scattering from the edge of the wedge, or diffraction from the edge of the wedge. After that, we'll talk about two types of diffraction. One is going to be edge diffraction, and the other one is going to be diffraction from the curved surface. And in the end, we'll talk about the scattering from the spherical structure. That is the most important structure you can consider. So let's start the first topic. So as you remember, for the wedge, we consider a geometry uh, like this. If we look at the geometry from the top side, this is your x-axis, okay, and this angle is nothing but alpha. So this is alpha in the phi direction, and as you can see that this is our perfectly conducting wedge. Okay, this is a perfectly conducting wedge, cross section of the perfectly conducting wedge. So as you can see that we have a PEC boundary condition at on two faces. First is when phi is equals to alpha, that is this one, okay, and the other one is 2 pi minus alpha, that is this phase, okay. So this alpha or 2 alpha is nothing but your wedge angle. Okay, 2 alpha is called the wedge angle. So in this particular geometry, what we consider is the reference line is nothing but your x-axis. So reference line we consider is nothing but your x-axis, and at the same time it is also a bisector of the wedge. So in this first case, when we consider uh, a reference or a bisector as a reference, I should rather use bisector as a reference. When we consider bisector as a reference, we derive these two expressions for the EZ and HZ for two types of polarization, that is TM to Z and TE to Z. Okay, and this is again for the region 1. This is for the region 1 when rho is less than or equal to rho prime. In other words, when your observation point is located much closer to the z-axis, to the origin in the radial direction compared to the location of your source. In our case, it's a line source. Now, in order to create TM to Z polarization, you would like to have, you will require to have a electric line source placed parallel or along the z-axis, right? So if your line source, electrical line source is placed along the z-axis or parallel to z-axis, that means you have E field which is parallel to z-axis. It has a z component. On the other hand, the H field is going to be in XY plane, and that's why, because your H field is perpendicular in the transverse direction to z direction, that's why this kind of polarization, when your electrical line source is located in the far field, the plane waves which it generates for your wedge is called the TM to Z polarized plane wave, right? Because your magnetic field is in the transverse direction to your Z axis. Now that's why it is TM to Z polarization. Also, similarly, let's say if you have a magnetic line source, for the magnetic line source, so what will happen? That magnetic line source will be placed along the Z axis. That means your H field is going to be have a Z component. On the other hand, your E vector is going to be in the XY plane. So now your E vector is perpendicular to Z axis, and that's why this kind of polarization is also called TE to Z polarization, transverse electric field to Z direction. And again, for that you have to have your magnetic line source in the far field, and then only it will create you can approximate the fields generated by that line source as a plane wave for your wedge at the origin. Now, so when you have TM to Z polarization, basically this will be the expression of your EZ field, because your electric field is along Z direction. And when you have TE to Z polarization, this will be your expression for H field, which is going to be along Z axis. Now, again, as I mentioned, this is for the region 1. And that region 1 is defined by this definition when rho is less than or equal to rho prime. So this is a region 1. Okay. So for this region 1, if you remember, we define that as a function of rho, once the location of your line source is fixed, okay, once we well define the location of the line source as a function of rho, as a function of radial distance, you have a Bessel function of first kind type of variations, okay, along the radial direction. Now, again, you have an infinite number of these Bessel functions. So you have infinite number of this Bessel function, and you add them together. Along with that, in the phi direction, we also have sine v times phi minus alpha. And why do we define this sine v times phi minus alpha function? So basically, this is a PEC wedge, perfectly conducting wedge, perfect electric conducting wedge. And as a result of that, on the surface of this wedge, when phi is equals to alpha, that is, let me just erase this so that I can highlight. This highlighted surface, yellow highlighted surface, is nothing but a surface located at phi equals to alpha. And on that surface, your total E field, tangential E field should go to zero. That is easy should go to zero. It should vanish. And that's why in order to satisfy that boundary condition, we assume that we also have a sign type of variation along the phi direction. And using the reciprocity theorem, we said that if we interchange the location of the transmitter and receiver, meaning your line source and the observer, then you should also have the same solution for a given problem using the reciprocity. So solution should remain unchanged. And as a result of that, we also introduce another sine function, which is nothing but sine v times phi prime minus alpha. Okay, phi prime minus alpha. Again, let me just clear this out, that all the all the prime components, all the prime coordinates define the direction and the location of your line source, or in general source, whereas unprime coordinates define the location and the direction of your observation point. So phi prime and rho prime define the location and direction of your source, whereas rho and phi define the location and direction of your observation point. So that is for easy, and that is for TM to Z polarization. Okay. Similarly, for TE to Z polarization, when you have a magnetic line source parallel to Z axis or parallel to edge, okay, parallel to edge, then again you will have Bessel function variation, Bessel function of first kind. In the radial direction, you will have Bessel function variations, and along with that, now for magnetic field, you have we introduce cosine functions. Why? Because if you remember, basically when we use Maxwell's equation and find the corresponding E field from the H field, basically you have to differentiate with respect to phi. And when we do that, when we differentiate this cosine function and get the expression for easy, it will again have a sine function variation. And that's why we will be able to satisfy the boundary condition that phi equals to at phi equals to alpha, on the face of your wedge, E field, total E field should vanish. So that's why we introduce cosine function instead of sine function, because when we take a derivative with respect to phi, we should be able to get a function which should vanish at phi equals to alpha. So when we take a derivation, or when we differentiate this cosine function with respect to phi, it will be again converted back to sine function. So that's why. And again, using reciprocity, we also introduce another cosine s times phi prime minus alpha function, right? So that we can interchange the observation point and the line source. Now, along with this, we also define something like a soft polarization and hard polarization. And how do we define that? So if you remember, if your E field is parallel to the edge of your wedge, so in this case, our edge of your wedge is directed along or placed along the z-axis. So basically, if your electric line source is also placed along the z-axis, then basically your E field is parallel to edge of your wedge. In that case, what happens is the diffracted fields from that edge are very weak, and that's why this kind of polarization is called soft polarization. On the other hand, if your E field is perpendicular to the edge of your wedge, in that case, what happens is the diffracted fields are much stronger compared to the other polarization, and that's why this polarization, when your E field is perpendicular to the edge of your wedge, is called hard polarization. So since now we have edge along the z-axis, if your E field or if your electrical line source is placed along the z-axis, then that is nothing but soft polarization. And we know that when you have an electric line source located in the far field, it generates TM to Z polarization. In other words, TM to Z polarization is nothing but soft polarization. And similarly, when your magnetic line source is placed along the z-axis, meaning H field is parallel to z-axis, and your E field is in the xy plane. So basically your E field is perpendicular to z-axis. That is nothing but T to Z polarization, and which is equivalent to hard polarization. So we have gone through all this derivation in the last lecture. This is just to remind you what we have discussed in the last lecture. And again, similarly for the second region, when rho is greater than or equal to rho prime, in that case, what happens is, as a function of rho, we have a Henkel function of second kind variation for both TM to Z and TE to Z polarization for EZ as well as HZ components. Okay, and again, it's a similar procedure. If you remember, in the second region, basically you will always have a traveling waves, the waves traveling outside, and that's why we have a Henkel function of second kind to represent that kind of waves. And along with that, we also introduce this sign functions for TM to Z polarization, and for TE to Z polarization we introduce cosine function. So for the same, using the same logical reasoning, that basically your E field, total E field, should vanish on phi equals to alpha phase. Also, the second geometry which we consider towards the end of the lecture, towards the end of previous lecture, was when we rotate our wedge in the phi direction, such that now one of the face is along the x-axis. Okay, so this is your x-axis, and now this is your wedge. This is your x-axis, and this is now your wedge. This is the wedge angle 2 alpha. So now one of the face of your wedge is we use as a reference. So now face, when we use face as a reference, what happens is, for both the regions, when rho is less than or equal to rho prime, and when rho is greater than or equal to rho prime, for both the regions, these are the expressions for TM to Z and TE to Z polarization for EZ and HZ components. Okay, EZ and HZ components, and where this capital G function is nothing but Green's function. Okay, and we are going to discuss this Green's function from the next lecture. We will start discussing in detail, but basically what we are trying to say is, after rotating our structure along the phi direction and placing it like this, where your one of the face of the wedge is along the x-axis now, and when we use that as a reference, you basically simplify the expressions for EZ and HZ component, and you can write them in terms of a common function. That common function is nothing but Green's function. Okay, and that Green's function is given by this expression again. So for the first region, this is the expression, and the second region, this will be your expression for the Green's function. Again, for both polarization, for TM to Z and TE to Z, the only difference is this plus minus sign. Okay, only difference is plus minus sign, as well as you can see here, there is 2, and here you have epsilon m. So epsilon m is nothing but Newman's coefficient. So that epsilon m equals to 1 when m equals to 0, and epsilon m equals to 2 when m is not 0. Okay, so when m is positive number. So here we have infinite number of summation from m equals to 0 to infinity and m equals to 0 to infinity. So one of the problem with this kind of expression is that in order to get accurate answer from these expressions, you have to include a lot of terms in this addition. So the more terms you include, the more accurate answer you will get from these expressions. And as a result of that, it requires a lot of computational resources in order to compute this kind of infinite summation. So to make this summation to converge, to get the convergence in the summation of this infinite summation, this operation, basically what will happen is you have to include a lot of terms in the summation, and that requires a lot of computational resources. So what we do is using Watson transformation, most probably we'll try to cover that in the following lectures if we get time, if we have enough time. Basically, using Watson transformation, we convert this summation into integration. And when we do that, when we convert that summation into integration, basically we are able to reduce the computational requirement, and we can get a very accurate answer at the same time. And that is nothing but this theories of diffraction. So various diffraction theories, basically that's what we do. So we'll see whether we'll be able to cover that topic or not, but that's how you basically convert your summation into integration, and that leads us to various diffraction theories. So this is a geometry of when you have a plane wave incidence on a wedge. So basically here your plane wave is impinging on your wedge at psi equals to 30 degree. Okay, psi prime equals to 30 degree. And what happens is this is your observation point at rho equals to 1 lambda. So basically you are in kind of a near field region, and we'll look at what will be the scattering observed by this kind of observer placed in the vicinity of the wedge. So now again we will consider two types of wedges, one with a wedge angle of 0 degree, and that is nothing but small n equals to 2 in this expression. So this is the expression of your wedge angle, and if you substitute n equals to 2, basically wedge angle will be 0 degree. And the other one is wedge angle equals to 90 degree, and you can get that with n equals to 1.5. Again, when you have a wedge angle equals to 0 degree, that is nothing but a knife wedge, like the edge you would see on a knife. Okay, so we'll see how that kind of edge diffract or scatter the waves, and it can also be called half plane. And this other case is highlighted by this red line, that is nothing but 90 degree wedge. So let's consider these two cases. And when we first look at the results for the soft polarization, so this is for the soft polarization. When we look at the diffraction pattern, you can see that because you have a soft polarization, that is nothing but TM to Z polarization, meaning your E field is parallel to the edge of your wedge. And we know that when the E field is parallel to edge of a PEC surface wedge, basically you will have much weaker diffracted fields, and as a result of that, consequently what will happen, you can see that in this region, in the shadow region, right, in this region, the diffracted fields are much weaker, much weaker compared to the other polarization. Okay, also notice that for the two cases, half plane, that is a knife wedge, as well as the 90 degree wedge, for both the cases your diffraction pattern is almost identical, they only varies in the there is only discrepancies between those two in the shadow region. Okay, in the shadow region, here in this region only you see that they have different values. Otherwise in most part they have the same identical values, diffraction pattern. So this is for the soft polarization. Now again we can consider also hard polarization. So this is the geometry, and for the hard polarization, as we know that for hard polarization, basically now your H field is parallel to H, and meaning that E field is going to be perpendicular to the edge of your wedge in the XY plane in our case. We know that whenever E field is perpendicular to the edge of your PEC structure, PEC wedge, you will have a much stronger diffracted fields. And as a result of that, you will see that in the shadow region, in the diffraction pattern, you have a much stronger fields, okay, much higher values in the shadow region. Now again, for the most part, most region, uh, you see hardly any difference between the diffraction pattern for n equals to 2 and n equals to 1.5, meaning that for the most part, the wage angle doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't matter even for 90-degree as well as for half plane. You get the same diffraction pattern for the most region. And again, you should also keep in mind that this is one particular case. Okay, you should always keep that in mind, that this is true when psi prime is equals to 30-degree, when your plane waves are coming from this direction. Okay, when the plane waves are incidenting like this, in that case you see this kind of diffraction pattern. So also, in addition to that, we also discussed that I just showed you, right, while explaining the expressions of the total E, Z and total H, Z fields, we also introduced something like sine V times phi prime minus alpha in order to maintain the reciprocity. So that is what here we are showing, that reciprocity in the wage diffraction. So in the first figure, basically your observation point is in the near field and your source is here, let's say it's located in the far field. As a result of that, you have something like a plane wave incidence because your line source is now placed in the far field. Using the reciprocity, what we can do is we can interchange the location of the source and the observation point. So now your source is located at rho equals to 1 lambda distance from the edge of the wage, okay, from the origin of the coordinate system, that is nothing but z axis. And as a result of that, that will create a cylindrical waves, right? So that will be cylindrical wave incidence. And now your observation point is in the far field. Your observation point is in the far field. So again, these are the equivalent to each other. These problems are equivalent to each other using reciprocity in the wage diffraction. Again, how do we define or how do we assume the direction of the diffracted fields? How do we do that? So before going into the details for the diffraction, so if you remember, when we discuss reflection coefficients and when we derive the expressions for the Fresnel reflection coefficient in chapter 5 of the textbook written by Professor Balanis. So in that chapter, when we derive the expressions of the Fresnel reflection coefficients, what do? We first of all assume the direction of the reflected fields and then derive the expression using those convention. We assume some convention or some directions for your reflected field and derive the expression. And in the derivation, if you get E field which is in the opposite direction, then what will happen is basically you simply multiply that original expression by -1. So you just introduce negative in front of the original expression in order to compensate for that, right? So that's what we even we do in the diffraction. So for, let's say, soft polarization, for TM to Z polarization, basically your E vector, E field is directed along the Z axis, right? For the incident waves. Now for the diffracted field also, we assume that it will be in the same direction along the Z axis, okay? And we only change the direction of the diffracted H field. When we do this, like when we assume that your diffracted E field is also going to be along Z axis, now what has changed? The Ki has changed, right? Previously Ki was here. It was coming towards the Z axis. Now here for the diffracted field, it is actually leaving away from the Z axis, right? So based on that, we have to satisfy Poynting theorem, right? So your E and H field should be directed in such a way that when you take a cross product of those E and H field, it should be directed in the corresponding K vector wave propagation, right? wave vector. So that's why you have to change the direction of hd, okay, with respect to hi. And now let's say if you go and derive the entire expression for this entire problem, and if you come up with a solution where you basically have h fill in the other direction, okay, and e fill also in the other direction, then what you do is you simply introduce negative term in front of original expressions, right? That's what we also did when we derived the expressions of the Fresnel reflection coefficient. So same thing we also do when we derive the expressions for the diffracted field. So that is for the soft polarization. Similarly, also for hard polarization, now your HI is going to be along the z-axis, or it will be parallel to the edge of your wedge, TE to Z polarization, right? And your HD, we will again assume that it is in the same direction. Diffracted H field is also in the same direction. So again, in order to satisfy the Poynting theorem, so that E cross H will lead us to the same correct direction of your Ki propagating waves, you have to change the direction of the diffracted E field compared to the incident E field, right? And if uh, after doing the complete derivation, if the directions are not in the correct direction, if they are in the opposite, then you simply introduce negative sign in front of these expressions, original expressions. So uh, basically, when we discuss the diffraction, you broadly have two types of diffractions. One is the edge diffraction from the edges of a finite structure, and the other one is a curved surface diffraction. When you have a curved surface, and again we discuss this curved surface diffraction when we discuss cylindrical surface, right? Cylindrical structures, or let's say a radiation from a aperture placed on the cylindrical structure. So for those things, we discuss curved surface diffraction. And if you remember, for that we use nothing but a creeping wave mechanism in order to explain the diffraction from curved surface. Also, as we just saw in the previous slides, that for the wedge, we also look at the edge diffraction. We also look at the edge diffraction, and we saw how the diffraction patterns are different for two different polarization, TE to Z and TM to Z, or hard and soft polarization. Now, those are for the plane wave and the straight edge. We'll see that based on the curvature of your surface or curvature of your edge of your structure, you have to additionally introduce some extra factors, coefficient, while defining the diffracted fields. And let's look at those. So let's first consider the edge diffraction. So that is edge diffraction. So as I mentioned, basically we saw this image when we started discussing the scattering from the wedges. So let's say that you have a plane wave incidenting from the normal direction. So you have a normal incidence, okay, like this. So this is your incidenting ray, okay. And for normal incidence, what happens is when I say normal incidence, that is nothing but if you look at the z-axis, okay, this is your z-axis. With respect to z-axis, this angle theta is nothing but pi by 2. Okay, so when it is not pi by 2, that will give you oblique incidence. So we also showed that in the previous lecture, that if you have a oblique incidence even on the cylindrical structure, you create something called a Kähler cone. Okay, Kähler cone. So same thing, similar thing. Also for normal incidence, when you have incidenting waves like this, the diffracted fields create a plane, and you have an infinite number of diffracted rays in the same plane, at theta equals to pi by 2. At for theta equals to pi by 2, you have infinite number of diffracted rays, and that plane is called nothing but plane of diffracted rays. That is plane of diffracted rays. Let me just again clear out these things. So that is this in this plane at theta equals to pi by 2, you will see infinite number of rays, and that plane is called plane of diffracted rays. Now similarly for the oblique incidence, as I just mentioned, that again you will create a diffraction plane. You will create a diffraction plane uh, that will be nothing but theta equals to, that is theta s. If you remember, we derived this. Theta s equals to what? Pi minus theta I. Pi minus theta I. So same derivation can also work for, same expression can also work for normal incidence, right? So when theta I equals to pi by 2, again theta s will be pi minus pi by 2, which is nothing but pi by 2. And that's why we had this plane of diffracted rays in the same plane. Now for the oblique incidence, this is the direction from which you are having a incidence of the incoming waves, and that is nothing but let's say some angle theta I. So at theta s equals to pi minus theta I along this direction, okay, along this direction, you create a cone. Since it is symmetric along phi direction, you create a cone, and that cone is nothing but diffraction plane, or it is known as a Keller cone. It is known as a Keller cone, and it is named after J.B. Keller, Joseph Keller, who contributed a lot for the development of the geometrical theory of diffraction. So he was one of the uh, main contributor in developing geometrical theory of diffraction, GTD, and that's why this cone is called Keller cone. And I showed you when we discuss cylindrical structures and oblique incidence, I showed you Keller cone, and I also shared one paper, review paper written by Professor Yahya Ramasammy from UCLA, and I recommended you to go through that paper. I hope that you went through that paper. So this basically we have gone through this concept of this cone, Keller cone, in the previous lectures. Now when we talk about the diffraction from the wedge, uh, basically for the observation region, for the entire observation region, we can divide the observation region in three parts. So this is a region 1, okay, this is a region 1 where you have direct fields, direct incidenting fields from the source. Then you also have reflected fields from the face of this structure, and then you also have the diffraction from the structure or edge of the structure. So you have three components. One is a direct incident waves, second is a reflected waves from the surface, and the third one is a diffracted fields from the edge of the structure. So that is the first region. Then and there is a second region. In the second region, basically you have only two components, that is direct field and the diffracted fields, direct and the diffracted fields from the edge. So you basically drop the reflected fields. You basically get rid of your reflected field in the second region when you move from first region to the second region, and that's why that boundary between region 1 and region 2 is called reflection shadow boundary, RSB. It is called reflection shadow boundary. And again, we also define something like a transition region. Okay, this is not a sharp boundary, it's a transition region. So this kind of region here, this region around reflection shadow boundary is called transition region, TR. Okay, and that transition region is for the reflection transition region. So basically on the one side of the transition you have reflected field, and on the other side you don't have a reflected fields. Okay, and that's why in order to compensate for the discontinuity, so basically we get rid of that reflected fields when we move from one region to the other region, and that's why you have some discontinuities in order to get rid of or to compensate for that discontinuity and make the fields continuous, you have to introduce diffracted fields. So for this reflection shadow boundary, along the reflection shadow boundary and around that, for this transition region, you will have a very prominent contribution uh, from the reflected diffraction. Okay, that there are two type of diffraction. Okay, we'll introduce two type of diffraction coefficient. One is going to be for this region, that is reflection transition region, around the reflection shadow boundary, that is this one. Okay, and then again, similarly, when we move from second region to the third region, okay, then what you do is basically inside the third region you only have the diffracted fields. That means you again drop another field, that is direct field. So in the shadow region, region 3, basically you also drop your direct field along with the reflected field, and again you will have some discontinuities in the field. And to compensate for that discontinuity along this incident shadow boundary, since we are dropping that incident fields when we move from second region to third region, that boundary is called the incident shadow boundary. And in that transition region, to compensate for that discontinuity, we introduce another diffraction coefficient, that is incident type of diffraction coefficient. So we will have two type of diffraction coefficients. One is going to be reflected diffraction coefficient, and the other is going to be incident diffraction coefficient, and usually we denote them by VBR. Okay, VBR for this region, and VBI for this transition region or somewhere near the incident shadow boundary. And again, make sure that it is clear to you that we don't only introduce diffracted fields in these regions only. Okay, we don't so diffracted fields are also continuous. Okay, so they exist in the entire region. Okay, the only thing which we are saying is that in these transition regions, the contribution will be much higher from those fields, from those diffracted fields. Okay, and again, so this is the geometry that when phi equals to pi minus phi prime, okay, you will have this reflection shadow boundary, and you will move from first region to the second region. And when phi equals to pi plus phi prime, okay, you will have an incident shadow boundary. Basically, you are now moving towards the shadow region, which we usually call a shadow region behind the object. And again, you drop the incident waves or direct waves when you move from the second region to the third region. Okay. So when you have this kind of diffractions from the edges, the diffracted fields are given by this expression. So again, if you remember, this is similar to the way we define reflected fields. So when we had a reflected fields from the surface, from the face of the structure, if you remember, those reflected fields are proportional to the incident field, right? So here also you have an incident field. Then you also have some reflection coefficient, capital gamma, right? Capital gamma like this. So that capital gamma is now replaced by dyadic diffraction coefficient. So this is something similar to reflection coefficient gamma, right? This is similar to reflection coefficient gamma. Along with that, you will also have amplitude spreading factor. You will also have amplitude spreading factor. Now, you might think that we did not have amplitude spreading factor when we define Fresnel reflection coefficient. But you also need to keep in mind that when we define Fresnel reflection coefficient, it is for the flat surfaces and infinitely large flat surfaces. Okay, infinitely large flat surfaces. So you do not have any kind of curvature. Okay, and again that Fresnel reflection coefficients were defined for in say plane wave incidents. Okay, plane wave incidents, and that's why we don't need to explicitly define the spreading factor or divergence factor for that kind of scenario. However, in general, you will also have something called a amplitude spreading factor when we define reflection coefficient. So same thing also here also see that for diffracted fields, you have amplitude spreading factor, and in the end always you will always have some phase factor. We also had phase factor when we define reflection coefficient. So what I'm trying to say is that it's the same way we define reflected fields. Okay, uh, we define diffracted fields the same way we derived or defined the reflected fields. Instead of now reflection coefficient, now you have a dyadic diffraction coefficients, and also that diffracted fields are going to be proportional to incident field at q equals to qd point.